Everybody in the fantasy community is trying to predict breakout players, but nobody's talking about these players, which I think is particularly interesting because these guys actually have a pretty valid path to success this year, and most people are just kind of sweeping them under the rug. So let's talk about them today on this channel. First, if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe and like this video. Those two things in conjunction, they take you half a second and they help us out a ton. Well, you'll want to be here as we get closer to the season, as we do more research, we get our draft strategies ironed out, and then during the season as we give you the most accurate, up-to-date information about the NFL that you could possibly need for fantasy purposes. So like I said, subscribe if you haven't. But let's talk first here about Darnell Mooney, who is coming now to this Atlanta Falcons team that is a brand new looking team, brand new quarterback, and now there seems to be some hope for the offensive weapons there, right? You've got Drake London there and Kyle Pitts, who have been in pretty much purgatory in terms of quarterback play from a fantasy perspective for the last 2 years. Now, with Darnell Mooney, he projects as the wide receiver 2 on the depth chart, so he's clearly going to be behind Drake London. Drake London is probably going to have the highest target share, but Darnell Mooney is going to be probably the second highest targeted wide receiver on that team. Some could maybe make the argument for Rondale Moore, but Darnell Mooney has had a little bit more not only consistency, but he's shown higher upside than Rondale Moore has, and I think he's more versatile. He's 5'10", 176 pounds. He's played now 4 years in the league. He played 4 years with Chicago. This is his 5th year in the league, and you'll remember Darnell Mooney because he actually had a pretty good year where he was the wide receiver 2. He was the wide receiver 23 in fantasy football that year, and this was a year where you saw him be extremely versatile. It's where you saw him gain a lot of value among fantasy football players, and a lot of people were thinking that Darnell Mooney would be something for years to come, and the fact of the matter is
Justin Fields killed your dreams.
That's pretty much true. And in 2021, he had 140 targets. And in 2022 and 2023, he had 61 targets. What you'll notice from his breakout year, he again was 11th in the league in targets and 17th in target rate that year. But when you're looking down the list here, he was even 9th in unrealized air yards that year. So he was a guy that was getting so much volume that it made it almost impossible for him not to be productive. He was 7th in the league in target separation. So this wasn't just a volume thing. He was 11th in the league in total route wins that year. And so this is a guy that showed some flashes of being a serviceable and decent fantasy football player and NFL player. And again, being the wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 on a Justin Fields offense is not a place you want to be from a fantasy football perspective. Being a wide receiver 2 on a Kirk Cousins offense, however, is a place that I think you do want to be. Why? Because we saw this last year, and the wide receiver 2 on this team, really the third option, but the wide receiver 2 was Jordan Addison, right? Jordan Addison was being out-targeted by Justin Jefferson and T.J. Hawkinson when they were on the field. But you still saw last year Jordan Addison as a rookie, at 175 pounds, come into the NFL, and Kirk Cousins threw him the ball 108 times, and it led to him being, what? The wide receiver 23. Interesting. Okay, so with Jordan Addison coming out there and having that type of production, I think that there is a route for Darnell Mooney to get that type of production this year. Not probably wide receiver 2 production, but I think he has wide receiver 3 ceiling. And I think this because I think that there are room on the Falcons offense for probably 80 to 100 targets for Darnell Mooney. He reminds me a lot of how Josh Downs was used in the Colts offense last year, where he was getting about 100 targets, where he was kind of playing complement to a guy who was playing mostly on the outside. Pittman, obviously Drake London is more of a true X, and so that will maybe even open up the middle of the field a little bit more for Darnell Mooney, but when you're talking about him fitting behind Drake London and Kyle Pitts is a guy as well who is pretty much a wide receiver playing tight end. And so with that being said, I think there's going to be a ton of targets in the middle of the field for Darnell Mooney if he can take advantage of that. And now, obviously, there are questions to if he can take advantage of that or not. And if you look up his ADP for me real quick, I'm curious. I think he's going... I have him ranked in like the 160s, I think.
Yeah, he's going towards the end of that.
But there are drafts where he's not even being drafted. Right. And so I think he's not only a guy maybe you could look at as your last draft pick of the fantasy draft. You've got a 12-round, 13-round, 14-round draft, but a guy that I wouldn't be surprised if he's a waiver pickup in week 1 because he's a guy easily that, Drake London, if him and Kirk Cousins don't have chemistry right away, Darnell Mooney could be the guy that ends up having a touchdown in week 1 and it ends up having 70 yards and 8 catches. And at that point, he's going to be one of the top waiver pickups in the league. So.
Yeah, Fantasy Pros ADP has him around 172 back-to-back with Jalen Polk. JJ McCarthy, you might not even start this year. Cade Otton, Shea Okonkwo, a bunch of no-name tight ends that have cap ceilings. So a couple of rookies there that I like. I like Polk there. I think Troy Franklin's a good shot there. But, I mean, at the end of the day, Darnell Mooney is going to be just as good a shot as any of those guys, if not better, because he's an experienced veteran that has shown flashes of production in the past, given an ideal situation. And I think this is the best situation he's ever been in his career.
I think it's not even questionable if it's the best situation that he's been in. So, all right, next guy here.
Yeah, so the next guy we're going to have here is Dontayvion Wicks. And it's interesting seeing Dontayvion Wicks go pretty close, just ahead, like a full round ahead of Darnell Mooney, which doesn't really mean much when you're looking at ADP 160. Like, it's kind of whatever. That's one of the last rounds of your fantasy drafts anyways. But with Wicks, I'm not going to lie, I've been pretty low on Wicks when a lot of people have kind of been on the higher end, optimistic of what he could do in an offense that's kind of crowded with a bunch of mediocre wide receivers that don't have a ton of upside outside of Christian Watson, who can't stay healthy and on the field. But with Wicks, I'm starting to warm up on him a little bit, because you can't just look at the game log, right? Like, a lot of people are going to look at the game log. I was one of those people. I just look at the game log. I'm like, okay, he had one game with 7 targets where he put up 15 points. Every other game that he put up more, when he put up double digits, he had to score a touchdown. There was only one game where he scored double digits where he had 12 points, and it was, 3 receptions for 91 yards, whatever. Okay. But I looked at the snap percentage more, and I was like, okay, he got a fair amount of respectable targets with very, very limited snap share. So I kind of dove into the efficiency numbers here. And I think the yards per route run and the target rate is really interesting. He had just over 2 yards per route run, which was 24th in the NFL. So he's doing a lot with the limited opportunities that he's getting, right? Because his target rate, 20.6%, 44th in the league. Nothing crazy, but as a 5th round rookie last year, playing behind Jaden Reed and Dobbs and Christian Watson, who all had seniority and favor over him, he was still able to make a dent in that offense. And I mean, a 20% target rate, he's getting a target 1 in every 5 times that he's running a route on the field, right? As a rookie. And 600 receiving yards, right? He's really, really close to like what JSN did last year. And we like JSN as a talent. Granted, it's a different situation. But with Wicks, those efficiency metrics specifically are really interesting. Also, the target separation. I think he was a little underrated as a route runner as well. And that was something that was showcased on his college tape that I think translated to the NFL. His target separation was 25th in the NFL among wide receivers. And his route win rate was 10th in the NFL, 54%. So what we're kind of taking a dart throw here on in fantasy in 2024 is that this efficiency and the stuff that he showcased in limited sample sizes last year will translate to 2024 given more opportunity, right? Because he was able to do a lot with a little. So we're hoping that optimistic that the Packers are going to give him more opportunity to showcase what he could do on the field. And you're not out anything if you miss. Right? If you miss on taking a shot on Dontayvion Wicks, you drop him in the 3rd or 4th week of the NFL season, you pick someone else up, right? It's not a huge investment at all. It's no investment at all, right? Same as Darnell Mooney. It's
Correct.
Like, if you're wrong, you move on and you spend some waiver dollars on a different guy. So I think the potential upside that he could have in an offense where the wide receiver room is really wide open.
There's no dominant guy there.
Right. And honestly, of the 4 wide receivers there, Dontayvion Wicks is probably the last guy I would bet on. If I'm being completely honest, the last guy I would bet on. But his price is totally fair, right? He's being priced like he is the last guy to have that chance to be the lead wide receiver, or even if he's the second wide receiver there, right? He outperforms his ADP, and he's a valuable guy that you can put in your flex spot this year. So good shot to take.
Yeah, and another guy that we've really not talked very highly of this offseason is Jake Ferguson. I think part of it is because, we think that with the amount of red zone targets that he got last year, to only bring in five touchdowns and still only be at 10.4 points per game, which was 10th in the league last year, in an offense last year where there really wasn't anybody there besides CeeDee Lamb. That's a little bit concerning to us. Now, the flip side of that is if Jake Ferguson is one of those tight ends, which this is pretty common, honestly. He's 25 years old now. A lot of tight ends you see break out at their 25, 26-year-old season, right? Yep. What if Jake Ferguson this year, because the Cowboys didn't bring anybody in, because he gets a ton of red zone targets, I mean, if Jake Ferguson gets 8 touchdowns, you're talking about him being a top 5 tight end. Mm-hmm. So that's why he's a good dart thrower. And he's definitely a good target for those of you who don't want to go tight end in the top 6 rounds of the draft, like myself. And I find myself drafting, some David Njoku as well. But Jake Ferguson's a guy that I think if I'm really wanting to just shoot for it, I'm feeling comfortable with it. Why? Because he's playing on a good offense. He's playing on a high volume passing offense. And he's a guy last year that proved he would get targets in the red zone where it counts. Okay, all of this is important. First in red zone targets last year. He was 7th in targets. He had 102 targets. That was 6 per game last year. He was 8th in receiving yards. He was 9th in receptions. And he was 7th in touchdowns. It's not like he was bad. But really, you would think with that much volume and being 6th in yak and 20th in unrealized air yards and 11th in deep targets that he would be more productive than 10 points per game.
Yep.
With that being said, I do think
Got to admit the upside.
The potential for him to be productive in that offense is ridiculous.
Right. And now that we've admitted the potential, right, it really is up to you on whether you think ADP 90 overall is worth taking a shot on Jake Ferguson. I mean, that is in the top 10 rounds. It's an 8th round pick where you're taking a shot on Jake Ferguson as the tight end 10 overall in fantasy football for 2024. I think that's too steep for me. I would much rather just fade tight end entirely and take a shot in the later rounds. There are a lot of people that are happy taking him there and think he's a great value, and I totally understand it because of the red zone opportunities. Just be aware of the risk that you are taking, admittedly, when you draft him at that price. That's why he's on this video. The upside's there. The risk is really, really high, though, and that's why we're not just outright saying that he's a huge buy in fantasy, because at the end of the day, we're playing with theoreticals. We're playing with ifs and buts in the top 10 rounds of your fantasy draft, which those are guys that you are expecting to consistently flex in your roster week in and week out.
You can get, I mean, who are the wide receivers and running backs going in that range?
David Njoku's a tight end, actually. Austin Eckler's a running back. Jordan Addison, wide receiver. Lab McConkey, Javonte Williams, Brian
Those
Robinson.
Are pretty good flex shots.
Deontay Johnson and Rashee Rice going just ahead of him.
And I mean, Rashee Rice is not even a question, but even taking a shot on a rookie like Lab McConkey, I feel like that's something I'd rather do.
Yeah.
But I get it if you want to take a shot on Jake. We acknowledge his upside, so let's just move on with that. I think everybody knows that if he gets enough touchdowns, he's going to be really productive. So.
Yep. Josh Palmer's the next guy that we're going to have here. He's someone that we've been pretty low on for multiple years now. I mean, there's always been, the Josh Palmer breakout whispers for quite a while, even when Mike Williams and Keenan Allen were dominating that wide receiver room. But now he has more opportunity, more upside than he, really ever has. And I mean, I just love seeing weeks 15 to 18 last year where he put up 4 targets, 8 targets, and 10 targets and scored 21, 9, and 11 points. I think there's a huge ceiling there for him to be productive in the Chargers offense. I'm being sarcastic. You can... crap on me or whatever. I know there's a lot of Josh Palmer truthers out there in fantasy for 2024. And admittedly, again, the opportunity is going to be there. The opportunity is going to be there. Not necessarily the volume, right? Because at the end of the day, the people that command high volumes of targets throughout the seasons are those wide receivers that are dominant. They're the ones that are good route runners. They're the alphas. They're the ones that command target volume regardless of who else is in that offense. Wide receivers don't just fall into volume. They don't just fall into getting 150 targets in a year, right? Right. And Josh Palmer's been in the league for 4 years. Josh Palmer is a guy that we have been expecting to break out for so long, and he had his best year in 2022 where he was wide receiver 37, 107 targets, and in 10 games last year he had 65 targets, right? I think you're looking at him getting, at ceiling that. Because even though Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are out of that offense, Brandon Staley is also out of that offense. His influence is gone. No more. It's Jim Harbaugh, and it's Greg Roman, and it's Justin Herbert, who, yes, will provide a decent amount of passing volume, but he ain't throwing the ball 700 times again. He's not. He's not throwing it like he did even just a couple years ago. The reason the Chargers have been so weak during the Brandon Staley regime is because of the way that they ran their offense, where they just chucked it downfield. They had no competent offensive line, and they were soft. They were just entirely soft, and they did not. Even though they had Austin Eckler as a really solid, productive receiving running back who was, a top option for like 3-4 years there, they were one of the bottom rushing offenses in the league consistently. They were entirely dependent on the pass game, and this is going to look completely different. Again, it does not mean that Justin Herbert isn't going to throw the ball, but what they're going to focus on and how they're going to operate that offense entirely is not Josh Palmer friendly. It's Lab McConkey friendly because they drafted him. This coaching regime drafted him, and they are going to utilize him more than anyone else in that offense at the wide receiver position. And then they're going to run the ball.
So on the flip side of that, when you look at Josh Palmer in the games that he's played without Keenan Allen in his career, he's played 11 games. He's had 54 catches for 655 yards and 3 touchdowns. In full point PPR leagues, that's 12.5 points per game.
Yep.
So that's not insignificant. A lot of people are going to point to Josh Palmer and say he hasn't really had the opportunity because he's been behind Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And granted, there were only really like 4 or 5 weeks over the last 2 seasons where both of those guys were out and Josh Palmer was able to be the wide receiver 1. And you saw him perform in quite a few of those games. So that's a totally valid argument. And if he does end up hitting like a 12 to 12.5 point per game rate, then he does hit from his price at this. I mean, this year, that's a good. That he's a hit.
Absolutely is.
So who's going
So
around
let's do
him?
a price check.
Yeah, let's price check it.
Khalil Shakir, Kirk Cousins, Romeo Doubs, Jacoby Myers, Jerry Jeudy, Marshawn Lloyd, Jalen Wright.
I mean, there are some guys there, like, you know.
I mean,
some of the rookie running backs. Maybe I'll take Palmer.
I think you could take Palmer over Rico Dowdle and Ty Chandler
right?
easily.
Yeah, and Khalil Shakir, honestly, like
Chuba.
I would take him over Khalil Shakir. I think he's a better receiver than Khalil Shakir is. But even then, like there are still guys.
It
in
is
that
actually
range.
the same type of argument there, though.
It definitely is.
That one is a 50-50
but I think
shot.
Yeah, it is. I think Palmer is better. But anyways, I see the argument for Palmer. So a lot of people, wanted us to address it after we addressed Ladd McConkey. So there you go. Draft Josh Palmer if you feel like he will in with the right opportunity.
If you want guaranteed wide receiver 2 production, please take Jacoby Myers.
Yeah, that's not even a question for me. Rico Dowdle is going to be next, and Rico Dowdle really is a product of circumstance because he really, when it comes down to it, was the only guy left in Dallas to carry the ball, right? Because, they decided they were going to let Zeke go, and then he basically went to New England. He actually wasn't bad there, but then they had Tony Pollard there. Tony Pollard was disappointing, depending on what your expectations were for him. I mean, I did about what we thought he would do.
You and I thought he would
What we thought he would do because, he's not really that type of back. But then they let Tony Pollard go, and he goes with the Titans. And so now you have Ezekiel Elliott back there, but outside of that, you got Deuce Vaughn. And the reality is they're not going to give Deuce Vaughn more than 5 carries a game, most likely. And with Rico Dowdle, he's a guy last year that played in 16 games that actually had 90 rushing attempts behind Tony Pollard, averaged 4.1 yards per carry, which as a backup, you would want to see a little bit more efficiency in an offense like that. However, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because, again, it's a Mike McCarthy offense and maybe Tony Pollard was kind of screwing that. I don't know. 17 receptions over 144 yards, and he had 4 total touchdowns last year. 5.7 fantasy points per game last year. This is a guy that I don't necessarily think is going to translate as a starter. If he is starting, I don't know who's starting there. If you know who's starting there, let me know. If you're a Cowboys fan, if you know, let us know because I don't know. He was 9th in the league last year in yards created per touch among running backs, so that is good. Outside of that, when you're looking at his efficiency metrics, he was 48th in yards created, 31st in production premium. He was 34th in true yards per carry. He was 23rd in yards per touch. He was 47th in evaded tackles, 39th in breakaway run rate, 47th in breakaway runs. A lot of times with change of pace backs that are second string on your roster, you see these efficiency metrics and they're glowing. We've seen this a lot. We've seen this a lot. We talked about this before this season with Khalil Herbert. We saw that. With Alexander Madison, you saw him be very efficient. And so the fact that he wasn't really efficient as a backup does kind of, concern me. With that being said, he is a warm body in an offense that is going to be scoring some touchdowns this year. So for that reason, I think you have to pay attention to Rico Dowdle. And honestly, I'm not probably super interested in drafting him, but he definitely is a breakout candidate this year. And he's somebody that if he gets enough touchdowns, he could end up being like a Gus Edwards this year, I think. So.
Yeah, Jerry Jeudy is going to be our last guy here. I think at this point, it's just a fresh start for him, right? It's kind of similar to the Josh Palmer argument where it's a fresh start. Everyone else in that offense is gone. It's a new coaching regime. Jerry Jeudy's on an entirely different team. He's on Cleveland, playing alongside Amari Cooper. Elijah Moore, I think at this point, you can... Maybe this is, too early, but I would consider him dead in terms of, fantasy production and what you're expecting from him. Jerry Jeudy has just been for his entire career, the first 4 years of his career. It's why they traded him away in Denver. It was interesting to see Cleveland really go out there and pay him a significant amount of money, heavily invest in him in an offense where, they have a pretty good running game and they like prioritizing Amari Cooper, but Amari Cooper can be pretty boom bust. He can get very limited target volume and still be productive because his down the field ability is just unbelievable. It's one of the better ones in the league, honestly. He's so fun to watch. But that really bodes well for Jerry Jeudy, who's more of a short to intermediate guy. I think it would be interesting to see what he could do, again, with a fresh start, with Kevin Stefanski, who I think is a really, really great offensive mind, offensive head coach that's going to help a guy like Jeudy that they just heavily invested in potentially be a guy who, could, I think, at best have low-end wide receiver 2 upside because he has showcased that in the past in less ideal situations.
Sure.
So again, going in the same range as guys like Josh Palmer, I would rather have Jerry Jeudy. I think he's just a better talent than Josh Palmer is. And Rico Dowdle, I would rather have Jerry Jeudy. Jacoby Myers and Jerry Jeudy going back to back, I prefer Myers. A lot of people would prefer Jeudy, again, because of the upside that he has admittedly showcased in the past before. It's just been in very, very limited sample sizes. We got to see a full season strung together for Jerry Jeudy for us to be super confident in him moving forward. But again, for this year, he's a decent dart throw here at ADP 132.
So there you go. There are some breakout candidates that not a lot of people are talking about that we wanted to talk about. Again, there are some guys on there, Wicks, Palmer, Jake Ferguson, that you guys have kind of, implored us to talk about more. And so we decided we would, bring those to your attention. But let us know what you think of these guys and some other breakout candidates you're drafting. Do us a huge favor. If you haven't already, drop a like in this video and make sure you subscribe. Also, head over to flockfantasy.com/domain. Use code domain. Any Motherflocker membership with code domain gets you our draft guide, which looks like this. It's about 50 pages long. It includes ranking, positional strategy, overall draft strategy, and more. So you'll make sure you'll get that because you're going to want it. It's pretty high quality. We spent a lot of time on it, and it looks freaking awesome. So flockfantasy.com/domain. Appreciate you guys so much. We'll see you later.